The Amazon jungle is the largest tropical rainforest in the world. A region which took millions of years to evolve, it stretches across South America from the Andes to the Atlantic Ocean. The Brazilian section alone is larger than half of the continental United States. The Amazon River contributes 1/5 of all the fresh water that flows into the world's oceans. That's 10 times more than the Mississippi. The Amazon jungle still contains regions where modern man has never visited and where native Indians live uncontacted. The rainforest teems with a huge variety of plant life. There are thousands of kinds of flowers and trees, many still unrecorded, and their value to mankind yet unknown. It's an explorer's paradise. The Amazon River peasants scratch out an existence from fishing and the forest, remote from the hustle of the modern world. But today, efforts to utilize the Amazon's resources are increasing. Since 1964, when the Brazilian military regime came to power, the pace of development has quickened. It has involved high risks and large sums of money. Many projects in the past have ultimately failed, but efforts continue. "300 miles from the mouth of the Amazon, a private development has been carved out of the jungle, almost in secret. The success or failure of this billion-dollar undertaking will have enormous implications for the future of the region. This pioneering project is the property of one man. Daniel K. Ludwig made his first fortune in shipping. Having over $3 billion, he is the richest man in America. A man who shuns press publicity. He is as mysterious as his jungle kingdom. In 1964, the Brazilian government approached him, anxious to find investors to develop their Amazon territory. 3 years later, Ludwig bought a piece of land in the north, 300 miles from the Atlantic port of Belém. It was a piece of land bigger than the state of Connecticut and was to become one of the world's largest private land holdings. Located on the Rio Jari, it had easy access to the sea. This is how the land looked when Ludwig bought it for just $3 million, less than $1 per acre. A few river people and Brazil nut collectors were already there. Some would have to move to make way for development. Jari was a piece of raw jungle, millions of years old. There were over 400 species of trees. Some were giant hardwood varieties, like this angelum, probably 500 years old. Ancient vines hung from many trees. The lush image of the forest vegetation is deceptive, for the soil which supports it is fragile and nutrient poor. Jari forester Charles Briscoe.
It's not a rich soil, it's a poor soil. High temperature, high humidity, heavy rainfall have been going on for 100 million years and eliminating most of what's here except what the trees actually have tied up. On the ground now you see leaves, but very superficial layer of leaves, then bare soil. And in that soil almost nothing. It's in the leaves, in the roots, or in the actual stems of the trees.
The Amazon rainforest is described as a counterfeit paradise. The thin topsoil contains few nutrients and is very easily damaged. The key to the survival of the forest is in the huge canopy of evergreen foliage. It is here that most of the vital nutrients are stored. This vegetation also shields the thin topsoil from strong sunlight and heavy rains. If you take away the vegetation, the soil is no longer protected from erosion. Fallen leaves provide vital nutrients. They quickly rot, and surface roots absorb their food content back into the trees, thus completing the nutrient cycle. The enormous variety of trees is the final key, for different species make different demands on the available nutrients, so what little there is can be completely used. This is perhaps the most stable ecosystem in the world, but even the most stable cannot always survive man's intrusion. Ludwig's first move at Jari was to cut down a few of the good lumber trees, like this Brazil nut. They would be used for construction work and to build homes and furniture for Jari employees. All the rest was to be bulldozed with machines. But disturbing the rainforest inevitably caused problems. When the Jari machines moved in, they made their first mistake. For uprooting the trees in this mechanical way damaged the thin soil. A process already known to cause problems. It was also expensive. So Ludwig had machines replaced with men and chainsaws. They went to work in huge gangs to clear the native forest. Within months, Ludwig prepared the ground for his bold enterprise, which was being built to fulfill a private vision. His main project was to replace the forest with a vast tree farm consisting of just one tree, the Malina. Its purpose? To provide pulp for paper as other supplies run out. In 1969, the first seedlings went into the fields. Ludwig was convinced he was planting the perfect tree. It was a native of Southeast Asia, never seen in the Amazon before. This was it, the Malina. It was on this little alien tree that a huge investment would be based. And this was why. These seedlings are 3 months old. In 8 years, in the right kind of soil, they can grow into a tree this size. One problem with the Malina is that it doesn't grow very straight. But genetic improvements by Jari foresters produced this less crooked variety. These trees are 3.5 years old. In the right setting, the Malina can grow 5 times as fast as the average U.S. pulp tree. Despite its fast growth, the tree had never been used commercially before, except as pit props in Africa. It might not survive the poor Amazon soil conditions, and its market value was unknown. Yet Ludwig was planting it on a vast scale. Some foresters resigned over the choice. Others were fired, but the rest believed in Ludwig's tree.
The native forest is maybe 500 years old and has about 300 cubic meters per hectare. When Malina is 10 years old, it's going to have about 300 cubic meters per hectare. The native forest, we can use maybe 30 meters. Malina forest, we can use all 300 meters. In addition to that great improvement in the amount of material we get, Molina is good for pulp. It's outstanding for pulp, for paper. It's also good for lumber. It's also good for plywood. It's also good for chipboard, presswood, hardboard. Almost anything you want to make, Molina is satisfactory.
It was a risk Ludwig was determined to take, and within a few years of the first planting, the Amazon jungle was making way for the new forest. But Ludwig was still gambling. There was so much that could go wrong. The jungle conceals many enemies. There are tens of thousands of insect species which present a constant threat. The leafcutter ant, for instance, eats into both leaves and profits, for pesticide is expensive.
The most noticeable pest particularly has been the caterpillar of a night-flying moth. And about this time of year, when the leaves are beginning to fall off the Molina trees, every year we get small outbreaks of this. They eat the leaves, which were going to fall off anyway, so the trees don't mind. And of course the caterpillar gets all the food it wants, so it thinks it's great. In addition, since the caterpillar is eating and digesting the leaves, this is quick fertilization for the trees, and they don't have to wait for the leaves to break down in the normal processes.
The native jungle is protected by its variety. A pest which kills one type of tree usually leaves the others alone. But when the jungle is replaced by a single tree species, the whole new monoculture forest is far less stable. For an insect or a disease which kills one tree can quickly spread and kill them all. When our camera team visited Jari, a new pest had appeared. It was a caterpillar never seen by foresters before. This time, the Molina survived, but the next insect attack could be the last. 3 years after the first planting, some of the Molina trees did die. It was another major problem. A fault line across the estate divides the property into two soil types, clay and sandy. On the sandy soil, the Molina, a native of clay, wouldn't grow well, and that's half of Jari's territory. Ludwig was faced with a huge area of potentially unworkable soil. Not a man to accept defeat, he made a decision to go for a second tree. Ludwig has no stockholders and is extremely rich, so he can afford to play his own hunches and ignore tremendous risks. In April 1972, without waiting for commercial trials, a second tree was chosen. By May, the order for the new seedlings had been placed. By June, they were being planted in the Jari nursery, and within 12 months, the new plantations would be established on the sandy soil. The tree Ludwig had chosen was the Caribbean pine. But the jungle was soon competing with the pine trees. For once the land was cleared, strong sunlight and heavy rain encouraged fast secondary growth. This land had been cleared only 6 weeks ago. The young pine could barely be seen. Unlike the Molina, pine trees take many years to grow a complete canopy. It would be a constant battle against the regrowing jungle. Even mature trees struggle. The Jari foresters came up with a solution. They decided to turn the young pine plantations into pasture land and use cattle to keep down the undergrowth instead of men. They planted a grass from the savanna lands which grew well, and now they get trees and beef from one piece of land. But where cattle have been raised in other areas of the Amazon, the soil has been severely depleted. If that happens here and fertilizers are needed, this approach could get too expensive to maintain. A number of questions still hang over the project. One is, how much can they get from the land before soil is exhausted? Tests began 4 years ago. They're monitoring the soil content as the trees mature. Under the Malina, results have been surprising. Company foresters say the soil has actually improved. They explain that the tree pumps up calcium from deep in the ground, and when the leaves drop, calcium is added to the topsoil. Whether this change will prove long-lasting is not known, but the Malina is doing well.
The pine is a little less sure, but what it really does is add organic matter to the soil, which, like adding calcium, is good for the soil, and absolutely eliminates erosion. Erosion under the pine stands is impossible because of the thick mat of organic material. So in actual fact, up to now, for both species, the soil has actually improved compared to under the native forest rather than degraded. We hope that will keep up, of course.
But the present quality of Jari soils could be deceptive. Often Amazon soils look good in the first planting, then go bad with repeated harvests. So whether Jari soils will last over time still remains a critical question. Our story now moves to the other side of the world, to a strange new ship off the coast of Japan. It is half of a floating factory destined for Jari, a pulp mill built in shipyards once owned by Daniel K. Ludwig. The essential components had been pre-assembled and dropped into place: boiler, lime kiln, bleach tower, and pulp dryer. The whole unit was designed to produce pulp and to be seaworthy too, for it was to be towed across some of the stormiest water in the world. The Panama Canal would have been too narrow. The Suez Canal had raised its fees. The route chosen for this floating factory would take it 15,000 miles around the world. Meanwhile, at Jari, engineers were dredging out the docking site for the pulp mill and its power plant. They drove in piles made from a local tree, the Masaranduba, a very dense hardwood, heavier than water. And finally, within 2 years of the contract being signed, the pulp mill sailed into view down the Rio Jari. On the 3rd of May, 1978, high technology invaded the Amazon jungle. Docking was achieved with precision accuracy. The two platforms were pulled into the docking site by bulldozers. Once in place, the whole area was flooded, and the platforms floated across to their final destination. The sighting was accurate to within a half inch. Within months, the whole complex had been completed. A full-scale pulp factory built to the most modern standards on the banks of the Rio Jari, complete with effluent treatment plant and even its own chemicals recycling plant. make the pulp mill operational in the fastest possible time, Ludwig gathered together a team of experts from around the world. In the green helmets, Brazilian engineers recruited from the south. They would be trained to run the mill once it was fully on stream. In white, Japanese engineers from IHI, who had designed and built the plant. In blue, engineers from Finland, experts in pulp manufacture. And in orange, the rest of the world. A curious international team assembled under the Amazon sun by one man, and all bringing with them their own traditions. The somewhat surprised Brazilians decided to join in. In 1979, 12 years after the first planting, Ludwig's pulp operation started up. A birch forest would have taken 60 years to mature to this stage. Malina has taken only 10. Trials in Finland have shown that despite some early worries, this tree can produce fine bleached pulp of good quality. The orders are already flowing in. By 1984, the Jari forest will be producing 12,000 tons of marketable wood per day. To accomplish this, a second pulp mill will have to be towed in. Further downriver, in the Amazon swamplands, Ludwig has set up a second grandiose scheme. It's a project that could potentially have great value for the Brazilians, growing food in the swampland, in soil carried downstream all the way from the Andes Mountains. This machine was specially designed for the project. It's a floating dredger that won't sink in the swamplands. It's digging out vast dikes like the Dutch Polderland to keep back the floodwaters of the Amazon River. On the reclaimed land, rich clay dredged out from the swamps is spread and compacted to take heavy farming machinery. It's given a slight gradient, just 1 foot in a mile. A gravity flood system keeps the water depth to precisely 4 inches and turns the banks of the Amazon River into a giant paddy field. At the start, this project nearly failed when rice productivity suddenly dropped to half the initial yield. Researchers couldn't find the cause until a shortage in the preferred rice fertilizer forced them to use a different one, ammonium sulfate. By adding this, the yield increased 250%. It was only then determined that the soil lacked sulfur, an extremely rare problem. So much is still unknown about farming in this region. that maintaining a successful operation is risky and difficult. Jari faces a constant battle against the life that lives in the swamps. To monitor insect populations, a simple light trap is used. This catches the insects that threaten the harvest. Ludwig hired an entomologist who had worked in other tropical rice fields. Continuous spraying with pesticides proved unsuccessful and expensive, so instead of overkill, the entomologist developed a low pesticide use tactic. The idea was to keep a close count on the number of caterpillars in the fields and take action only when they reached a critical peak. A radio call to the air base warns that the pests are at a danger level. An aerial attack is then launched. The rice operation at Jari is entirely air-based. Pesticide, herbicide, fertilizer, soil dressing. Even the rice seed is sown from the air. Planes take off constantly, about 200 flights a day at the height of the caterpillar season. The essence of its success is speed. For to be profitable, they must achieve 2 harvests a year during the dry season, since in the rainy season, the harvesting equipment gets stuck in the fields. This is the most mechanized rice operation in the world. The approach uses a lot of energy, which means that the rice isn't cheap and will get more expensive as the price of oil goes up. It has been suggested that production speed could be achieved with men instead of machines. This way, perhaps even 3 crops instead of 2 could be harvested every year, since rice could be grown in the rainy season as well. For Brazil, a country which imports rice and has a severe unemployment problem, this approach with careful modification could be a valuable way to develop the Amazon. Yet for Ludwig, using people instead of machines would require a drastically different setup, for thousands of workers would have to be employed. And at present, his yield per acre is 5 times higher than anywhere else in Brazil. Since rice is now providing him with cash flow, the Jari system is unlikely to change. In fact, the tendency here is to use less labor wherever possible. Ludwig plans to replace the people used in this bagging operation with more advanced machines. The only manual labor left in the rice paddies will be the flag wavers guiding the planes.